Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I'm your host, Kimberly Cloud. I have a very special guest for the show today. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Kimberly. My name is Michael Hammond. I'm in Chicago, Illinois, and I'm a retired homicide detective with Chicago Police Department.
It's an honor to meet honorably retired police detective. Can you go ahead and tell me about your past leading up into your present?
Sure. I was actually born in kind of southwestern Indiana. Grew up down there. I ended up going to Indiana State University, but I had family in Chicago. I was often in Chicago, and I've got a criminology degree at Indiana State University. Moved to Chicago. Eventually, got on the Chicago Police Department, and served on Chicago Police Department for 22 years in total, just short of that. And the last 16 of those years, I was a homicide detective.
Wow, tell me about your job and your duties and how you switched to a homicide cold case detective.
Yeah, so I started as a patrolman, regular policeman, and then I got promoted to detective 6 years into the job. I took it, and it's a tested position, so you take a test, and then I got promoted to detective. Got pulled into homicide, started working homicides. Did that for 3 or 4 years, and then got asked to go to a federally funded cold case homicide unit. And I think that just happened because I always had interest in working on some of the older murders, and I guess I'd shown that I was a competent detective, and that's how I ended up in cold case.
Tell me about how many cases have you solved while you were a detective?
It's really difficult to say. I probably worked on several hundred murders in 16 years. I wouldn't even know what that number is, but probably solved um, a hundred some murders, I guess, over that time period.
Wow. And did
That's
you
kind of a
ever,
wild guess, but I
I
think it's close.
understand, that's great. Did you
Thank
ever
you very
have
much.
to work with the FBI and bring them in to
Yeah,
a cold case?
yeah, we often did. We would work. I never really worked a direct task force, which is where you work with them all the time. But the FBI was generally of great help to us. Like I had several cases where the offender had fled the jurisdiction, and the FBI is great at tracking people down. U.S. Marshals as well, and finding them for us. And the FBI has such great resources. If we were kind of stuck with something, we could reach out to them and say, "Hey, can you guys do anything with this?" Especially with evidence, really good with that. So yeah, often.
Take me on a journey of what you do with your podcast now. What do you do?
So I got to give credit to my daughter to that because she was a big true crime podcast fan, and she just said, "Hey, Dad, I love these shows, but they just are missing your kind of perspective." And so I listened to several, and I thought, well, these are really well done, but I see what she's talking about. They're asking questions that I kind of know the answer to offhand, and so first I had to talk myself into it, kind of, and the whole process is, you probably understand. I mean, the whole process of putting yourself out there is, especially, kind of doing the work I did, was I had to overcome that. And then I decided to do it. And then when I decided to do it, I said I wanted to make it about the victims and focus on the victims. 'Cause I just don't think they get enough attention, and the families of the victims. And then it just started out great because I reached out to a couple of the families of victims I worked for. And, I wasn't sure how that would go, after some time, because you're meeting up with people in like what is, the most traumatic part of their life. And Unfortunately, we just don't bring good news. Even solving the case, a lot of times they're happy, but it doesn't bring the closure a lot of times that people think that might. But the families were great. They were very excited to hear that, I was going to celebrate their family members who'd been killed and give them a voice to talk about it. And so it really has turned out to be a pretty cool experience and kind of cathartic for me, to kind of exercise some of those demons of all that stuff that I saw.
Well said. Take me on a journey where you solved one case that you solved, and how did you solve it? Because they're very complex. It's not like CSI or anything. Y'all have a lot of work to do. So take me on a journey.
That's correct. I think the one that the best describes that, a young woman, 21-year-old woman, 2 days after Thanksgiving in 2001, who was found shot to death in the back of her car, and it just didn't make a lot of sense. She had no reason to be where she was at, and it took a long time. It took 9 years to get that offender prosecuted, 4 years to identify him, 2 years to convince the prosecutor that we had enough evidence to take it to court, and then a couple more years to get it convicted. And that whole time, that's not a cold case, where it went. It kind of We ran out of things to do. That whole entire time was just grinding because we had DNA evidence, but he was not in the DNA system. So we had to go back through and kind of talk to everybody she knew and ask them for DNA samples to compare. And then, and what really solved the case was the phone records, because she had talked to somebody before she left her house, and we needed to know who that person was to know if they were they were involved or not, or if they knew where she was going or why she was going where she was going. And it turned out to be the killer. But this was between in 2001 through about 2005. And back then, now, you kind of can, with computer algorithms and that, I can plug in phone records, and they can give me a tree of, all right, to call
Love
they
it.
call. Back then we couldn't do that. Back then, like, I had to get the phone that she had called is what we call a burnout phone, which is, if your audience doesn't know what that means, that's a phone that's opened under false, somebody using somebody's false ID or something. So you don't really know who it is. So you have to just take the phone records and then grind at it. You have to say, okay, it called this number 6 times, whatever. And then you have to get the phone records for that phone.
Do
And you
you
have
get
to
the phone records from the FBI, or is it police technology that y'all use?
mostly from the servers. So like Verizon or AT&T or whoever it is, you have to get court ordered subpoenas, because they don't want to, then they shouldn't release that information just at a request. They have to have a court order. So each time we'd have to go get a judge's order signed, send it off to, let's call it Verizon, and Verizon then would send us back the phone records, which sometimes was a 6 week process. And then we'd have to go through those phone records and see if we could, uh, you know, tie it back to that original phone. It's just a lot of grinding work. It's become easier now with technology. The process is still the same, it's just much faster. But back then, it was just going knocking on doors, and you never knew that. Not that you're really fooling anybody, but you can't. You never know if you're going to knock on the door of the killer, right? So, and it's not the danger part so much as you don't want to give away what you know. So every time we're going, saying, "Hey, we're investigating this identity theft," which was true. This 72-year-old woman had her purse stolen. They used her ID to open this fake phone. So it was a semi true story. Uh, and just to feel out, do you know who had this phone? Do you recall? And that's a it's just a long, arduous process, Of course, a lot of times we weren't fooling anybody because I'd get calls back saying, "You stopped by asking about a homicide." Like, well, no, I didn't ask about a homicide, but yes, ma'am, I stopped by. Right. So,
Yeah, well said. I stay in Seattle, and there's
mhm,
8 million people here in Seattle, and there's only 8,000 police officers. Now, there's 24,000 FBI agents in United States. I know they branch off in different sectors too,
sure.
but generalization is 24,000. What do you think? Do you think we should defund the police, or do you think that we should have more benefits for police? Because I plan on running for city councilwoman. So I want to know your input as being a hardcore Chicago homicide cold case detective.
Yeah. So, it probably comes as no surprise. I'm a big supporter of defunding the police.
Me
The
either.
police. I think that if you want to talk about the I think defunding the police, the concept is not great because it hurts people in underserved neighborhoods. People in underserved neighborhoods need more police service. Now, you could argue, and I won't argue against it, that they need police service that services them better, that understands their needs better. But defunding the police won't do that. You need more police, more service for people in these neighborhoods that where the violence is more prevalent. So I mean, I think that you could reallocate money in better ways often, um, but I wouldn't. The whole process of defunding the police, where it's been tried, is being shown to be uh, really a problem and unsuccessful. I think that not to pick on him, but I do have a friend that works up there. Minneapolis is a good example. They decided they were going to just defund a lot of the police,
In
and
Minneapolis, there's
me-
so many shootings. There's so many
yeah,
shootings.
right. There's so much going on, and the George Floyd incident was a horrible incident. It was tough for policemen, believe it or not. I mean, that's watching something like that happen is hard on all of us, and we're not going to support something like that. We don't like it. We don't want it to happen. But as an example of what happens as a result of that, and I know this, not that I'm a Chicago guy, but I have a good friend who was a homicide detective in Minneapolis. We did some work back and forth, and I'm just familiar with it. But just to illustrate really quickly, full staff, the Minneapolis Police Department at that time was 900 police officers. Since that has happened and they have kind of defunded or tried to defund the police department, they've lost 300 officers. So they are now trying to police that city with two-thirds of what they once had. They had six, now they have 600 police officers working the street, and it's untenable.
You
And the
think they're
good
burnt out? Do you think they're burnt out?
all that, I think they have to be, right, because somebody still has to cover the shifts, right?
Yes.
And so with less people, you've got more people working, and then what happens? Policemen are tired. They don't react the way they want, and some poor person who calls the police because they need help gets a policeman who's exhausted, who's worked 2 days, 3 days in a row, or 2 weeks without a day off, or whatever it is, and you're not getting that person at their best, and that they're it's really not the way to go. And who suffers with that? Of course policemen suffer, but who really suffer is people who are in the underserved neighborhoods, who need the service the most. The people who live in the wealthy neighborhoods where very little happens, it doesn't affect them as much. You know what I mean? Although they get outraged when somebody breaks into their car. I'm being a little bit silly. They get outraged and say, "Where are the police at? Somebody broke in my car and stole my stereo or whatever." But it's not the same as people worrying about being shot at in their neighborhoods, and so I think that there are not enough. The FBI is not designed to be police departments. They're designed to be, investigators on a much higher level. We need them in support of police with their resources, and also we need them looking at national security issues of concerns for terrorism and things like that. There's not 24,000 FBI agents. There might be in the ancillary, but there's
Exactly.
only
That's what I was
yeah,
trying to say.
yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I
Tell me.
think I think there's only about 3 or 4 thousand actual FBI agents who are on the street doing investigations. They're not
That's like
really.
200 people to one agent. That's a lot. Like I thought,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, it's not enough, and when you say there's 8 million people in the Seattle metropolitan area, where there's 10 million in the metropolitan area of Chicago, but there's only 3 million or a little less now in the city of Chicago. In the city of Chicago, we have 10,000 police officers. New York City is roughly what, 9 million people in the city proper, and they have 30,000 police officers. So in Seattle, you're way underserved based on your population and what you're telling me. You know what I mean? Um, and what always bothers me about that is it hurts poor people the most, you know.
what do you think? This is my last question before I ask you about the future. What do you
Sure.
think? What do you think the solution is?
Well, the solution can't come from police. It has to come from us as a society. We have to decide that underserved, poor Black and Spanish neighborhoods and places, poor white neighborhoods, that we have to put more resources in general in for schools and facilities, and then because if you're looking for the police for an answer, it's never going to be good, right? Because the police get called when there's a problem, and proactive policing works in terms of like helping to slow down violent crime and that, but that's not the way to go because you're causing more interaction than between policemen and people on the street, and that's when problems happen. I mean, I think as a society in general, we have to do better. A solution for police in general is, and I think that going that direction, but we just need to speed it up. Policemen need more mental health training for themselves and for the people they serve, right? So they understand when they show up at places, there's potentially a mental health issue going on, and to help get mental health, trained people there, things like that. And also, I just think that we need to take the media out of it, things like that. I think if you, and not to, I'm not trying to pound my own drum here, but I think if you listen to my first couple of podcasts and you hear the conversations between me and these family members of these homicide victims, that's closer to what we are as a society than what you would see if you watch television. Because, both of the women that I talked to whose family members were killed are great women, and they still live in the neighborhoods. They're older now, African American women who I have real affection for, and hearing us talk is not what I think people think the conversation would be like. It was more like two old friends who shared a common rough experience and just talking about that. Now I think that's what life is closer to being than what like a lot of the media portrays. And I think we just need to remember that. And so in that perspective, I think that policemen we need to give the resources, and as communities kind of come together and have policemen at basketball games and interacting with the community, so everybody knows everybody, right? So a policeman sees some kid down the street, maybe he's doing something wrong. If he knows that kid, he's going to know, well, he's not a bad kid. Now this is not the right thing that he's doing. Let's go talk to him and talk about that. Maybe it changes the course of not just his life, it starts to change the course of the neighborhood, and the only way to do that is is interaction and everybody kind of starting to understand each other. And that sounds a little bit like, some 60s hippies thing, but it's not. It is just people who know each other and talk to each other understand each other better, right? I believe anyway.
I was debating on saying when I run for city council that there should be a police officer in every 2 mile radius. Also, I was saying there should be some type of robotic technology. They should fund the police and give them more technology, like a robotic technology that can detect guns on a person in a 2 mile radius near schools. Because, and then another thing, in the middle schools, children are walking home and getting robbed by homeless people here. I want to change that too. That's just not right. What is your input?
I agree with that. I mean, look, so if you're going to, I don't know the technology that well. I'm now 6 years removed from it. And technology moves fast, so I think the technology of it exists to look for guns, and then I think is great. What I would say, especially if you have that specific problem, like kids are not safe walking home from school, a great place to start would be to say, all right, here's why I want to fund the police better, and then as a city council, will hold the police department accountable to this, and say, you know, we want them out at our talking with our principals, and we'd love to have them between, you know, uh, 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. when they get in school, and 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. when they're home, have policemen in the area. And maybe for a while it might not be sustainable with manpower, but at least to start the program, have the police walking with them, have officers walking with them, so that they'll get to know the kids, they'll get to know the teachers. The bad guys will see them and say, "Well, this is a problem. We're going to go somewhere else." You know what I mean? Um, the I think as a councilman, you can do that. The issue is, all right, if I'm gonna agree to fund this, then I want accountability. I want to know that these officers are out there and that they're doing this, because police, departments, and I love policemen. I love police. It's my whole life. Um, but at a higher level in police departments, what ends up happening a lot of times is, oh, we've got this money, we're going to use it for this. Well, you as city councilman, you have to say no. This is what I agreed to. This is why I agreed to this funding, and this is what I want done. And it will happen. And I think that's the way to directly you solve a lot of problems. Then you solve that direct problem of, to keep the kids safe, not getting robbed as they walk home or harassed. And also now you're building a relationship between those policemen and those young people and their parents, and everybody starts to understand each other better. And some of the problems that we end up with, um, you know, um, uh, will, I think, slow down, hopefully,
Do
and
you, do you think that the police should be given more money so they won't be as burnt out and more benefits? And that, I promise you, that's the last question.
Yeah, well, of course, I think everybody in every walk of life would like more money and more benefits. I think that the benefits are as key as the money, because everybody, I think, is concerned about things like health insurance and retirement and those things, and so are policemen. Time off is an important thing. Ideally you want your policeman, well rested, in a good mental health state of mind, so that their exhaustion, their stress, their trauma. I mean, as you I'm sure know, you'll have a policeman, and this is separate from being a homicide detective, but you'll have a policeman who, just as a scenario to understand, he works, or she works, they work, their days off because they're short or whatever. So they work 5 or 6 days in a row. They haven't got a lot of sleep. And then the fourth or fifth day, they have to go somewhere where some child has been killed, and you just don't mentally change that and get rid of it. So Now you're exhausted. You're mentally kind of traumatized just because you're a policeman doesn't remove you from your humanity, and and then somebody calls you with something and you go, and to them it could be a life-changing traumatic situation, but to the policeman it's like, I'm just exhausted, and this is not nothing compared to this baby I saw die yesterday. And and you can't look at it that way as a policeman. You can't be in that mindset, but it's hard not to if you're exhausted and tired. So I think that, yes, that's to answer your question directly. Yeah, that's why you want to fund the police, so that they're trained, they have mental health training, and they're rested and they're serving their community. And then once again, you back that up as a city councilman, if that's what you're running for, with accountability. Okay, look, I'm doing these things for you as policemen. I i want to see, the results back. I want my policemen healthy and rested and serving my community, you know what I mean? I think that's, in my mind, that's how it works best.
Well said. Oh my God, well said. We need that. And I'm going to make
But
sure I remember it. And when I edit your video, I'm going to make sure I recap and write that down. So, last question. Where do
yeah.
you see yourself going with your podcast and your stories for the future?
Well, I hope to continue to celebrate and kind of memorialize victims, because I think they get forgot about after 10, 20 years after their murder. And a lot of these people who were killed, their lives had a lot of great value. Everybody's life has value, but especially, I think, especially the first two I chose were amazing human beings, and their life was cut short, and it hurts all of us as a society when we lose them, and we shouldn't forget that. I also want to, talk about and continue to talk about cases that are open. I just did one on a case. We're coming up on the 50th anniversary of this young woman's death, and I don't want to forget about. I think that we can still get an answer to that. I've started to have some guests on my show who've got some great stories about how to, get past or work with and heal from post traumatic stress and trauma. Um, and eventually, hopefully, we'll get to the point where uh, I'm helping people. I've already got people reaching out from around the country saying, "Oh, I had this family member that was murdered, and we never found out. Can you help me?" Well, right now, as I sit here, I don't have the resources to do a lot of that, but eventually, maybe, I will be able to do that. And in general, anything that I can do to continue to feel like I'm being a service, I hope to be able to continue to do, because I'm still a pretty young guy. I was just, you can only work the homicides like that, I think, for so long. It has an expiration date. You know what I mean? So that's my goal with it all, is just to continue to get the word out there.
Well said. And how can the people find you and your podcast? Last question.
Sure. My podcast is Detective Story with Mike Hammond, and it's on Apple and Spotify. My website is let's see, is detectivestorypodcast.net. You can reach me directly at, my email is mike@detectivestory.net. Um, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And for you, Kimberly, you have my number, and any questions or anything comes up, you're welcome to call me anytime. I appreciate you having me on.
Hold on the line. You all that
Sure.
are out there watching, give him a round of applause. 22 years as a detective, cold case detective. He transitioned to a cold case detective. Like, that is a hard job. And I give it to him in the heart of Chicago, y'all. Y'all,
Thank you very much.
y'all, you're welcome. You all, I will see you later. Stay on the line, Mr. Hammond, and y'all take care.